This is WFYI News Now. It's February 12th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, a new bill at the Indiana State House would make it illegal for people who are homeless to sleep outside. A federal judge temporarily freezes plans to reduce research funding that universities and medical centers rely on. And sharing a fraction of property tax funds with local charter schools could soon become a requirement for all public school districts.
Charter schools that we are supporting fully with transportation and building would be negatively impacted. There simply would not be enough to go around.
Those stories coming up. But first, vacant properties that plague neighborhoods continue to be an issue in Indianapolis. As WFYI's Jill Sheridan reports, one recent demolition highlights how difficult the process can be.
A long-abandoned apartment building on the near northeast side was recently torn down. Right around the corner, two other blighted complexes need to be demolished. Cook Medical President Pete Yonkman has invested in the neighborhood with the new manufacturing facility and a grocery store. He says vacant buildings are a persistent issue for community revitalization.
It sounds maybe simple that we're just going to tear down some buildings, but it involves a Byzantine layer of regulations, ordinances, laws, you name it, whatever the government can throw at you.
This site and others are owned by an out-of-state company that has let properties fall into disrepair. The city increased funding to address a backlog of demolition projects to $3 million. 41 structures were demolished last year. There are plans to tear down 57 structures in 2025. I'm Jill Sheridan.
A new House bill in Indiana would make it illegal for people who are homeless to sleep outside. Side Effects Public Media's Elizabeth Gabriel reports advocates worry the bill would criminalize homelessness.
If House Bill 1662 is approved as it is, anyone who lived on the street for at least 24 hours after receiving a warning could receive a Class C misdemeanor. 2 years ago, over 6,000 people were counted as experiencing homelessness in Indiana. Fort Wayne resident Sarah Conrad couch-surfed and lived in her car as a teenager. Now she's concerned about people's ability to gain future employment and find housing if they have a Class C misdemeanor.
In 2015, I lived in a 1996 Ford Taurus where I was constantly harassed by police and threatened with tickets. I never once understood how is this going to stop me from being homeless.
Indiana Bill 1662 is still in the Committee on Government and Regulatory Reform. I'm Elizabeth Gabriel.
A federal judge has temporarily frozen plans by the National Institutes of Health to reduce research funding that universities and medical centers rely on. Side Effects Public Media's Ben Thorpe reports the cuts are an effort from the Trump administration to curb federal spending.
The new policy would limit what NIH grants can cover in indirect costs, such as facility upkeep and administrative costs, to just 15% of a federal research grant. Jay Green is a research fellow at the conservative think tank Heritage Foundation. He says many institutions, including Indiana University, have indirect costs of up to 60%.
And I think that this is perhaps part of an effort to discover the true rate.
But Timothy Richardson, a senior scientist at Indiana University School of Medicine, says the cuts could have a chilling effect.
It's either going to impact the brain drain of the states or it's going to impact the budgets of each state.
Richardson says the policy will also likely impact the kind of long-term research that has led to breakthroughs on things like HIV, cancer, and diabetes. I'm Ben Thorpe.
And for our final story today, Indianapolis Public Schools is the only school district in the state that shares a fraction of property tax funds with local charter schools. That could soon become a requirement for all public school districts. From WFYI's Education Desk, Rachel Fredette reports on the legislation that would make the change.
A Republican-proposed Senate bill gives charter schools a slice of funding from school districts' property tax dollars. Indianapolis Public Schools and some other traditional public school districts say a change in revenue could cause school closures and the elimination of hundreds of jobs. And IPS Superintendent Alicia Johnson says those threats extend to charter schools the district partners with.
Charter schools that we are supporting fully with transportation and building would be negatively impacted. There simply would not be enough to go around.
Johnson says Senate Bill 518 and the state's property tax plan would devastate her district. She says IPS could lose $40 million by next year and as much as $80 million by 2028. Advocates for the bill say students at charter schools should receive the same funding as students at traditional districts. I'm Rachel Fredette.
Senate Bill 518 passed out of the Senate Committee on Tax and Fiscal Policy. The bill now heads to the Senate floor. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin and Zach Bundy, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share. And follow WFYI on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.